Inferno Rising, the Firestorm Chronicles. The sun bore down mercilessly on the parched Californian landscape, its golden rays bouncing off brittle grass and cracked earth. For months, the rain had been an elusive dream, leaving the forests and valleys thirsty, their foliage now fuel waiting for a spark. Despite the serene beauty of rolling hills dotted with ancient oaks, an invisible menace hung in the air. The unmistakable scent of dryness, as if nature herself anticipated the calamity to come. Sophia Martinez leaned against the truck, her face a canvas of sweat and dirt. As a senior wildfire mitigation officer for the Sierra Ridge District, Sophia had spent the last 3 weeks monitoring conditions that seemed to worsen with every passing day. She glanced at the digital thermometer clipped to her belt, 102 degrees Fahrenheit, another record-breaking day. But it wasn't just the heat. A relentless hot wind whispered through the mountains, carrying with it an ominous forewarning. "Red flag warnings up," her colleague Ben Carter said, stepping out of the truck. His voice was low, almost reverent, as if speaking too loudly might summon the very thing they feared. Sophia nodded grimly. Red flag warnings were a regular occurrence during California's late summer, but this year felt different. She had studied climate patterns extensively, and the signs were clear. Rising temperatures, lower humidity, and a buildup of dry vegetation from years of drought. But something else gnawed at her, something more immediate. The growing tension between human expansion and the untamed wilds. "It's not just nature anymore," she said, breaking the silence. "It's power lines, illegal campfires, arson. The wild is angry, and we're giving it every reason to lash out." Ben scratched his chin, his weathered face lined with years of experience. "Well, let's hope it doesn't lash out today." But hope was a fragile thing in these parts. It began with a spark, a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker that leaped from a faulty electrical tower on the outskirts of a small town named Juniper Hollow. The line, overloaded and sagging from years of neglect, snapped under the weight of a gusty afternoon wind. A brief arc of electricity ignited the brittle grasses below, and the fire spread with terrifying speed. By the time Sophia's team received the first alert, it had already consumed 5 acres. The flames moved like living creatures, dancing across the landscape, feeding on dry brush and leaping effortlessly between tree canopies. Sophia stood frozen for a moment, her eyes fixed on the plume of smoke rising like a dark omen against the azure sky. "Dispatch all units," she ordered into her radio, her voice steely despite the chaos blooming in her chest. This is no ordinary fire. Ben, already on the move, started assembling their team. Fire engines roared to life, helicopters prepared for aerial drops, and teams of firefighters donned their protective gear. It was a coordinated dance they had rehearsed 1,000 times, but each fire was unique, unpredictable. This one was no exception. By the time they arrived at the fire line, the blaze had escalated into an inferno. Towering flames devoured everything in their path, reducing majestic oaks to ash within seconds. The heat was so intense that even standing hundreds of feet away felt like standing in an oven. The roar of the fire was deafening, a primal sound that made Sophia's stomach churn. The team quickly deployed, hoses sprayed powerful streams of water, but it felt like fighting a tidal wave with a garden hose. Helicopters thundered overhead, releasing cascades of water and fire retardant, but the winds scattered much of it before it could reach the flames. The fire seemed to anticipate their every move, shifting direction with the gusts and finding new fuel to consume. "Spot fires everywhere," Ben shouted, pointing to smaller fires igniting ahead of the main blaze. The wind carried embers for miles, sparking fresh flames in residential areas and dense forests alike. Sophia knew they couldn't stop the fire outright. Their goal was containment, to slow its spread and protect critical areas. But containment lines were breaking faster than they could establish them. Even as they fought valiantly, she couldn't shake the sense that they were losing. Hours turned into a grueling day. Exhaustion clawed at the firefighters, their faces streaked with soot and sweat. Sophia's radio crackled constantly, updates pouring in from different sectors. Evacuations were underway in Juniper Hollow, but reports of trapped families sent fresh waves of urgency through the team. The fire wasn't just destroying trees and homes, it was rewriting lives, carving scars into the land and the people who called it home. Sophia felt the weight of every decision she made. Should they protect the residential area to the west or secure the nature reserve to the east? Every choice had consequences, and none felt right. As night fell, the fire's glow lit up the horizon, a hellish reminder that the battle was far from over. Sophia stood on a ridge staring at the devastation below. The once verdant valley was now a sea of flames and smoke. She clenched her fists, her mind racing through strategies and calculations. They would keep fighting. There was no other option. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. In the heart of the blaze, the seeds of the next chapter were being sown. A fight not just for survival, but for understanding the fragile balance between humanity and nature. And as the fire raged on, Sophia's resolve hardened. They would face this inferno head-on, not just as firefighters, but as guardians of a land both breathtaking and unforgiving. The fire had been born from a spark, but its legacy would burn far longer. Sophia adjusted her breathing mask, the acrid smoke thickening the air as she and her team descended into the fiery chaos. The fire line stretched endlessly before them, a molten wall of destruction licking at the edges of the containment zones they had barely established. With the wind shifting unpredictably, every second felt like a gamble. They weren't just battling the flames, they were wrestling with a force of nature that seemed to have a mind of its own. "Sector 3, report," she barked into her radio, her voice muffled but commanding. A crackling response came through. "This is Sector 3. We're losing ground fast. The fires jumped the line and headed toward the residential outskirts of Juniper Hollow. We need reinforcements." Sophia cursed under her breath. The situation was spiraling faster than they could contain it. "Copy that, Sector 3. Hold as best you can. We're sending units your way." Ben jogged up beside her, his face nearly obscured by soot. "The winds are gusting up to 30 miles per hour. Embers are flying everywhere. It's a goddamn ember storm out there." Sophia glanced at the inferno, where glowing embers rained like malevolent fireflies. "What about the aerial units?" "2 helicopters grounded. The winds are too strong. We've only got one left in the air, and they're stretched thin." Sophia's jaw tightened. She knew what they were up against. Fires like this didn't just burn, they consumed. Every shift in wind, every change in terrain, turned the battle into a deadly chess game where one wrong move could cost lives. Further down the line, the situation was just as dire. Sophia's team had managed to divert some of the fire's fury away from Juniper Hollow, but the flames were relentless. Crews were working tirelessly to carve out containment lines, using bulldozers to strip the land of anything flammable. Chainsaws roared as firefighters felled trees, creating fire breaks to slow the blaze's advance. Sophia joined a group digging trenches with shovels and hand tools, her muscles burning with effort. Every move felt Sisyphean. The fire seemed to mock their attempts, devouring the land faster than they could clear it. The heat was unbearable, even through the protective layers of her gear. Suddenly, a loud crack pierced the air. Sophia's head snapped toward the sound. A towering pine tree, its trunk weakened by flames, was toppling toward a group of firefighters. "Look out!" she screamed. The crew scattered just as the tree crashed to the ground, sending up a plume of embers and ash. One firefighter stumbled, falling to the ground. Sophia sprinted toward him, her boots crunching on scorched earth. She grabbed his arm and hauled him up, the heat searing her exposed skin. "You okay?" she shouted over the roar of the fire. He nodded, coughing violently but steadying himself. "Thanks, boss." Sophia gave him a firm nod before turning back to assess the situation. The fire was pressing closer, and they were running out of options. Hours blurred into a grueling haze of heat, smoke, and exhaustion. The sun dipped below the horizon, but the fire illuminated the night with an eerie, hellish glow. The battle raged on under floodlights and the relentless energy of those too stubborn to quit. "Boss, we've got a problem," Ben said, running up to her with his tablet in hand. Sophia peered over his shoulder at the live map displayed on the screen. The fire had split into 2 main fronts, with one veering dangerously close to a propane storage facility on the outskirts of Juniper Hollow. "If it hits those tanks," Ben didn't need to finish the sentence. The explosion would be catastrophic, spreading fire and debris over miles. Sophia's mind raced. We can't let it get that far. We'll divert resources to create a secondary containment line. We'll need foam trucks. And foam trucks are 2 hours out, Ben interrupted. We've got to hold it off with what we have. Sophia set her jaw. Then we'll do it. Sophia led the charge to the new fire line, where the flames were creeping perilously close to the propane facility. The wind was working against them, pushing the fire directly toward their position. Using every resource at their disposal, they launched an aggressive attack. Hoses doused the flames, hand tools cleared brush, and brave crews ventured dangerously close to the Inferno to set back fires, burning controlled patches of land to starve the blaze of fuel. Sophia worked alongside her team, her hands blistered and her lungs aching. Despite the danger, she felt a surge of pride watching her crew fight with unwavering determination. "Spot fires to the east," someone shouted. Sophia turned to see small, hungry flames licking at the edge of a residential area. A mother and her 2 children stood frozen on their porch, their faces pale in the flickering light. "Go!" Sophia yelled, motioning to 2 firefighters. They rushed to the family, helping them to safety before the fire could engulf the home. By dawn, the tide had turned. The fire had been slowed near the propane facility, and containment lines were holding, barely. Sophia stood on a ridge overlooking the scorched valley, her body aching but her spirit unbroken. The devastation was immense, but they had saved lives, protected critical infrastructure, and bought time for reinforcements to arrive. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the smoky sky, Sophia turned to Ben. "This isn't over." He nodded solemnly. "Not even close." The fire still burned, but so did their resolve. The fight wasn't just about extinguishing flames. It was about defending the delicate balance between humanity and the wild, even as that balance teetered on the edge of collapse. The fire finally began to relent after 5 relentless days. It wasn't victory. It never truly was with a force as destructive as wildfire, but it was a reprieve. As aerial units resumed operations, cooler temperatures and diminishing winds allowed containment efforts to gain the upper hand. By the 6th day, the Inferno that had threatened to obliterate Juniper Hollow was officially contained, though small flare-ups persisted. Sophia stood in the middle of what had once been a vibrant forest, now a smoldering wasteland of blackened trees and ash-covered ground. The air was thick with the acrid stench of charred wood and earth. She pulled off her helmet, her hair plastered to her head with sweat. Around her, firefighters packed up equipment, and their exhaustion palpable, but mingled with quiet relief. "Damage reports are coming in," Ben said, approaching her with a clipboard. His voice was subdued, lacking the gruff humor he usually carried. "Over 30,000 acres burned, dozens of homes lost, but—" he hesitated, looking at Sophia. "No civilian casualties." Sophia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It was a small mercy in the face of overwhelming devastation. As the community began to pick up the pieces, Sophia and her team worked tirelessly to assess the damage. The fire line had held near the propane facility, preventing a catastrophic explosion, but the surrounding area was in ruins. Homes had been reduced to rubble, their occupants left to sift through the remnants of their lives. The forest, once a haven for wildlife, was eerily silent, its inhabitants either fled or gone. Juniper Hollow itself was scarred but standing. The town square became a makeshift hub for relief efforts, with tents offering food, clothing, and medical supplies. Volunteers streamed in from neighboring communities, their presence a testament to the resilience of human kindness in the face of disaster. Sophia walked through the square, her boots crunching on gravel and ash. She stopped to help an elderly man unload boxes of donated clothes from a truck. "Thank you for what you did," the man said, his voice quivering with emotion. "My granddaughter was one of the families you saved. We'll never forget it." Sophia nodded, the weight of his gratitude settling heavily on her. For every life saved, there were countless losses, homes, memories, landscapes. She carried them all like invisible scars. In the following weeks, recovery efforts shifted into full swing. The burned areas were surveyed by environmental experts who warned that mudslides and erosion could follow without vegetation to stabilize the soil. Sophia joined a meeting with local officials and forestry specialists, discussing reforestation plans and long-term strategies to prevent future fires. The drought isn't going away, one scientist said, pointing to a graph displaying rising temperatures and declining rainfall. We have to adapt. Sophia agreed. Controlled burns, better forest management, stricter building codes near wildland areas. We've been reactive for too long. It's time to get proactive. But she knew it wouldn't be easy. Fires like this one were becoming more frequent, fueled by climate change and decades of mismanagement. The battle against wildfires wasn't just about extinguishing flames, it was about changing the way people lived alongside the wilderness. One afternoon, Sophia visited a nearby school that had narrowly escaped the fire. The children had created a mural in honor of the firefighters, depicting a line of brave figures standing between their town and a wall of flames. Above the scene, bold letters read, "Thank you, heroes." Sophia felt a lump rise in her throat as she looked at the mural. She thought of her team, of Ben and the others who had risked everything to save strangers. They weren't heroes in their own minds, just people doing their jobs. But to this community, they had been a lifeline in the darkest hours. Ms. Martinez? A young boy with soot-streaked cheeks approached her, holding a small potted sapling. "This is for you. My dad says trees grow back stronger after a fire." Sophia knelt to take the sapling, her heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you," she said softly. "We'll plant this together, okay? And we'll make sure the forest grows back better than before." The boy nodded solemnly, and for the first time in weeks, Sophia felt a flicker of hope. Months later, the scars of the fire were still visible, but signs of recovery had begun to emerge. Green shoots pushed through the blackened earth, stubborn and resilient. Wildlife slowly returned, drawn by the promise of renewal. Sophia stood on the same ridge where she had watched the fire consume the valley. Now, she looked out over a landscape in transition, raw and wounded but alive. She thought about everything the fire had taken and everything it had revealed, the fragility of life, the strength of community, and the unyielding power of nature. Ben joined her, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Figured you'd be up here," he said, handing her one. "Couldn't stay away," she replied, taking a sip. Ben gestured toward the valley. "It'll take years, but it'll come back. It always does." Sophia nodded. "And so will we." She thought of the sapling the boy had given her, now planted near the edge of the town. It would take decades to grow into a towering tree, but its roots were strong, just like the people of Juniper Hollow. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Sophia felt a deep sense of peace. The fire had tested them all, but they had endured. And in the ashes there was always the promise of something new. The forest would rise again. So would they.